I don't know about you, but it was wet where I live. That's okay, yes. And I see Hannah made it too, so my whole family made it through the waters. And feels good. Feels really good. Good rain. Well, today we have the youth group here.
Not as youthful as I used to be.
Yeah. If you didn't get the memo this week, the youth group is not ready to share. They realized that having returned on Sunday from a really good trip and then having to report the next Sunday was just going to be too quick of a turnaround, and they probably couldn't do justice the way they wanted to the report. So they will report, but sometime in the future, once they've got that all figured out. So we have the opportunity to hear Misti's story, Misti Kroeker's story, who has been a long-time member here, to tell about her work at the penitentiary in Hutchinson, some of the programs that they offer, her perspectives as she works from her oversight of a wing of 500 people, men mostly, all, and I don't know, how many of you have ever toured the prison? I'm just curious. Okay, so about half.
How long ago, Mother?
Long time ago. We, the youth group, back when Huffningsau and Hebron were together as a youth, we took the youth through there, and I'm proud to say, and the goal was to scare them into not wanting to live there. and none of them are living there that I know of. And but it was a very good experience. How many of you visit prisoners there or have contact mentorship relations? So we have like 3. So that's good as well. Well, Misti, oh man, you need to go. I didn't bring your bio. She has a great bio. I wish I would have read. And then I made the mistake of thinking, well, you all know her anyways. But you know, part of these sort of events are that we don't really, we know each other, but how do we really know each other? Like, how much do we really know each other? I learned a lot reading her bio. So go back to your emails, read her bio, and then maybe you can ask her questions down the line too. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for your providence. I thank you for workers in your kingdom. I thank you for the gifts that Misti has, experiences she has. Now open her mouth to speak as she shares from her perspective the work that's done in our neighboring town and the people that she engages, and as she talks about our neighbors. And give us ears to hear and to interact with this presentation. Be here in this place. Amen. Let's welcome Misti.
I appreciate the word that Wilmar used in engagement. That is what we do. We don't, we do a lot of direction and there's a lot of adjectives, a lot of verbs, but engagement is really important. You can't, even in our setting, you can't make someone do something they don't want to do. But if we engage with them, talk to them about the benefits of what we're trying to do with and for them, it's a lot more effective. So thank you for that word. I want to start out with just a real quick jot of history. The facility is about 140 years old. You can choose your beginning date a lot of different ways, when the first stone was set on the foundation or when the final wing was completed. But approximately 140, 145 years of age. So all of you have always had this facility in the background as part of the Hutchinson community. But historically, it's fascinating, and architecturally, I had no idea that I cared 2 whits about architecture until I went to work there. So if you ever get a chance to tour it, look at the architecture of the buildings. Hutchinson lobbied really, really hard back in the late 1870s, early 1880s, to have the facility placed in Hutchinson. A lot of communities in the state lobbied for that. Lansing already had a facility, and the state was looking for a second location. Hutchinson wanted it, Hutchinson got it, Hutchinson threw a big party when that was announced. Originally, it was called the Kansas State Industrial Reformatory. It was still called that when I went to work there. I'm not sure how many years ago we switched over to Hutchinson Correctional Facility, and all of the facilities their title is identified by the community that they're in, so it kind of helps all of the Kansas citizens know which facilities are which. Our facility sits on 1.5 sections of land. Some of it is used, and some of it is mowed because it's not being used for anything. I don't know if there's really any long-term goals for this land, but where the animal shelter is, that was our land that we sold to the city, and where the new county jail is, sits on our land that we bequeathed to them in some manner. I don't know if it was sold or donated to the cause or what, but that acreage is all part of us. It was purchased in the 1880s for $25,000, section and a half. The primary purpose was to provide detention and vocational or industrial training to first-time offenders, youthful offenders, 16 to 25 years of age. Rumor has it, I've never dug into this to confirm if it's true or not, but it makes for a nice story at least, that some of that original $25,000 was donated from an organization, a ladies' organization in Hutchinson, a ladies' club, Ladies of the Night. But when you think of who the facility was targeting toward, young men who maybe weren't following the right path, which group in the community might have known them better than anyone else and known their needs than these women? So they saw a need, and they did what they could to contribute toward that, if you accept the story as true. When we first started bringing inmates in, the facility was far from being completed. A wing was done, and we started bringing inmates in, and those inmates then built the rest of the facility. So they would work all day building, and then in the evenings they would attend educational classes, because most all of these men at that time did not have a proper education. Anybody who might, if you've driven by the facility on the south side, Avenue G, you'll see that the perimeter wall is angled on that southeast corner. That's because the railroad, for the purpose of our facility only, brought a spur in off of the rail line to bring in the limestone. And so that's why that corner is angled off, because that's where the spur comes through. So that was the primary vocational skill that was taught to inmates, was stone cutting, stone laying. As these young men completed their sentences, released from prison, they went out into Kansas communities with this new skill set. And so a good number of the limestone buildings that you will see in Kansas were probably built by these men who learned their trade in prison. And they were earning at that time about anywhere from $3.50 to $5 a day, which was more than the officers who were working at the facility, who were in charge of containing them, or those who taught them how to do that skill. They were making less money than the inmates were making once they applied the skill. So that was a big win for everybody. So some of the things that used to happen at the facility that some of you might remember, I don't remember anything about the belt buckles during my career, but I've heard people talk about how they have their KSIR belt buckle. We haven't, I worked out there for 32 years, and we never made a belt buckle while I was there. I think shortly after I started working there, they quit making the cedar boxes, but I know that broke a lot of hearts because people really liked the cedar boxes that were made by the inmates at the facility. But we don't do that anymore. But maybe closest to home for us and for the farming community, there used to be quite a farm operation at the facility. Much of the food that was consumed by the inmates was produced on the property. There was an extensive farming operation to include a dairy barn, hogs, beef, chicken and eggs, a vegetable garden, and 400 acres of rotating wheat, barley, milo, silage, and corn. So we had quite a farming operation that was still in operation to a very small degree when I started. I knew the last two farmers that we employed. They weren't very good farmers. But in 1974, the majority of that whole operation was shut down for several reasons, to include other vocational programs were coming on board that were more beneficial to inmates in terms of a marketable skill once they released. The high cost of maintaining the farm, and simply lack of inmate interest. We started getting more urban inmates from Wichita, Kansas City, the cities, and not rural sort of people who found value in farming or wanted to work in that when they were released. So to talk about what we do today, Hutchinson is one of 8 facilities throughout the state. We are a state facility. We're not a county jail. Reno County Jail, when they made their new one, they kind of undermined us a little bit on the name, because we are the Hutchinson Correctional Facility, and they are the Hutchinson County Correctional, or Reno County Correctional Facility, or something like that. The name is very, very close, and it's very confusing for law enforcement through the rest of the state. When they come here, they will go to the wrong facility every time. The other facilities are in Lansing, Ellsworth, Norton, Winfield, Wichita, El Dorado, and Topeka. And Topeka houses the only female facility. To speak specifically to the Hutchinson Correctional Facility, we are supported by a little over 500 state employees, so that's what I would be. But we also have a large number of contract employees and volunteers, and it takes all of them to make the ship float. We house all custody levels in 3 different three different units: minimum, low medium, high medium, max, and special management. Special management would be those inmates who are under the tightest security control, and that is our segregation unit. We refer to it as our restrictive housing unit. If I hear anybody say the whole, I'll probably tap you on the hand and say, please don't do that. Even within our own walls, we struggle with our own staff to use proper terminology. The terminology has connotation, and it's important that we use the right words. We house all these inmates at a cost of just a little over $67 a day. Of the 8 facilities in the state, our cost is the 3rd lowest in the state. There's a tremendous matrix that determines how that number's arrived at that I don't even want to try to understand. But kudos to us for managing our money well, and that we can do this at the 3rd lowest cost in the state. I'm going to give you a few stats, try not to bore you too much with them. These stats are from our last annual report, so they're about a year old. But at Hutchinson, we house all ages. So a year ago, in the age group between 15 to 19, we housed 17 of those young offenders. We had 37 offenders who were 65 years of age or older, but our largest group is the 25 to 29-year-old. We house all races, white, black, Hispanic, American Indian, Asian, every race is represented at Hutchinson. For whatever reason that no one understands, Hispanics are grouped in with white, and whites obviously are our largest population, and that makes sense because that's very reflective of the state of Kansas as a whole. In terms of education, Our largest group of offenders have no diploma and no GED. But a very close second are those offenders who do have a GED. And then kind of further back behind that are those who have a high school diploma. The average length of sentence falls into two camps: less than 6 months, which surprises a lot of people, or 5 years or more. Those are our two largest groups. The type of admission, because we have inmates who come into the correctional setting for a lot of different technical terms. The largest group is what we call new court commit, which means that person has committed a new crime to come back to prison on. It wasn't a technical violation of his parole or probation. So what that means is that the parole officers in the community are working really hard with these guys to work with any technical violations that they may have committed so that they don't have to violate them and come back to prison. These guys are actually having to commit a new crime in order to come back most of the time. And when they come back, they usually have at least 3 person felonies. We have person felonies, which is pretty self-explanatory, and non-person. So all of that is Hutchinson information, but Hutchinson Correctional Facility stats are very reflective of the Kansas Department of Correction as a whole. So what this means for all of us is that the average Kansas inmate looks like a white male, 25 to 29 years of age, who has no high school diploma or GED, and who's already been convicted of 3 or more felonies, and is now back in prison serving 5 years or more. That's what the average inmate looks like. And I, based on my own experience, would add to that that he very likely has no marketable job skills and has a substance abuse or drug addiction issue. Of every 100,000 Kansas residents, 331 of them are incarcerated. And that falls right down the middle of the nation. Louisiana has the highest rate of incarceration. Maine has the lowest. Kansas falls right in the middle. The KDOC is on the tail end of the law enforcement continuum. If you consider that continuum looks like your community police officers, law enforcement officers, they make an arrest, that person goes to local detention, your county jail. He waits there while he's being charged. He enters the judicial portion of the process. If he's incarcerated, he then comes into a state facility. He serves his sentence. He's released back into the community, and he's under supervision for a period of time. So we're kind of the tail end of that continuum. So while that inmate is with us, we engage in a lot of endeavors to turn this tide, to change behavior and to change cognitive processes. So I wanted to walk you through what some of these practices are, some of these things that we do. I mentioned the lack of education. So right off the bat, we are offering academic education. That's done through a contract provider. And it's Title I all the way through the earning of a GED. We provide vocational education, and that's also provided through a contract provider. Programs come and go over the years, dependent on financing, always. Money rules everything. Who we can partner with, what kind of instructors are available. But currently, we are offering HVAC, plumbing, and electrical. Those are all highly marketable job skills. An inmate can walk out with a certificate in any of those. If he can also walk out with a GED, that's a win right there. That man can get a job the day he walks out, if not before. We provide work opportunities under a multitude of venues. The public generally is most familiar with our work release program. We have a lot of businesses in Hutchinson and surrounding communities excuse me, who work with us, and we have inmates, incarcerated inmates, who leave the facility and go work a job just like any of us might. A lot of them are in food service. So you go to a restaurant, you won't see them out front. They're not to have contact with the public, but they'll be in the back cooking your food, washing the dishes, cleaning up the area. We also have a lot of manufacturing businesses who employ inmates. The Etc. shop has had an offender working there under the work release program. We have another program called private industry, which looks, acts, and operates exactly like work release. There's just a difference in contract language. But we have a lot of private industry. So up at Chase, the Cal-Maine egg plant, they have a lot of inmates that work for them, and that's all through our private industry program. Several other businesses in outlying communities. And then we have on-site private industry, where a business basically leases space from us. They bring their entire work operation into our property, and we provide that stream of employees. It's a win-win for everybody. The employer knows that they have employees who are going to show up every day. If they don't, we make sure that they get there. Anybody who owns a business knows that your biggest problem is going to be your hired help, in that will they come to work consistently, on time, and can they pee clean? And that's a big issue in the community and inside the walls, quite honestly. So some community businesses that you might be familiar with that do business on our property is Hubco, Electrics, and SeatKing. These inmates make a wage just like you would if you were working a job in the community, and it's a win-win on both ends. You know, we talked about what the employer gets out of it. The inmate earns a good wage. Out of that, he pays the state of Kansas room and board. He pays any restitution in connection to his conviction. He pays fines and fees that he may owe. He pays child support, because they all owe child support. Back taxes, any money that he owes to the state, portion of that is taken out of his wages and applied toward his debt. And then he's required to save a certain percentage for his release, so that when he is released, he is not penniless. Even if he manages to spend everything else that he makes during his incarceration, we mandate that he saves a certain percentage. We provide a lot of community support, which provides work opportunities to offenders. So the fairgrounds has a crew of about 24, 25 inmates that work there year-round. And then during the state fair, we triple that, so that we support everything that's happening out there. It's been a little while since I worked with this particular population, but we, at least in the past, if we don't still do it, have an inmate working at the courthouse and an inmate working at the Reno County Museum. Again, just to help with maintenance and lawn care, custodial sort of things. The Kansas Department of Corrections cannot make a profit. You know, it's unethical, immoral to make money off the back of an incarcerated person, and that's not our intent. But there is a sub-entity of the KDOC called Kansas Correctional Industries. They can turn a profit, and that's their goal. And there's a lot of different avenues that they do that in, but at Hutchinson, on our grounds, KCI, Kansas Correctional Industries, runs a print shop. And any one of you can have anything printed at that print shop. T-shirts, posters, church bulletins, whatever you like. Lansing facility has a paint shop run through KCI, and there's several others. Some of you are familiar with the Wild Mustang program at Hutchinson. That is run through KCI. It's not so much to turn a profit, but we are in contract with the Bureau of Land Management to manage those horses. We have inmates that work out there who take care of the horses and train the horses. And we train a lot of horses for Border Patrol. We've sent a lot of horses down that way. And then the kind of jobs that people usually don't think about, but are critical to the operation. We have a little over 1,800 inmates on any given day, and they all want to eat. Somebody's got to prepare that food. So we have an entire crew of inmates who prepare the food. The laundry operation, the maintenance of it. You know, it's a 140-year-old facility that we keep asking to do modern-day functions. We are constantly working on the structure and the building and tweaking and changing, and those buildings are nothing but evolution, yet at the same time very sturdy and stagnant. It's pretty amazing what we do there with trying to bring technology into that environment. And then just simple custodial jobs. You know, there's every area has a certain number of inmates that's job is just to keep it clean, keep it clean, keep it clean. In terms of programming, we offer substance abuse, sex offender abuse treatments. We have lots of recreational opportunities. We have basketball, softball, handball, weights, track. We have tournaments for everything. We come up with things specific to specific types of populations within the facility. So older inmates who aren't as physical, you know, we'll have chess tournaments for them. We try to be very inclusive and make sure that everyone has an opportunity at recreational opportunities. A long time ago, we used to allow community teams to come into our environment to play basketball. And a million years ago, that was one of my tasks, was to run background checks on these community people who would come in, and I remember running one on Warren. We have a kind of an in-house store. We just refer to it as the canteen, where inmates can purchase hygiene items, snacks, over-the-counter medications, sweats, and some types of clothing, tennis shoes. You know, we provide the basics of everything that they need, but we also allow them the opportunity to purchase a lot more than that. We have a library operation that looks just like any community library. They can come in, read books and periodicals, check out books. They can do legal research on their cases. We allow, under proper supervision and screening, inmates to work together on legal cases. And then just some kind of fun side note sort of things that we do. We have our Lucky Dog program at our East Unit. These are dogs that are brought in from area shelters, and inmates socialize the dogs, train them in basic obedience, just make them a good family pet that are then able to be adopted. And that's a really great program. Inmates really like being able to be around an animal. And I have seen some very great big grown men bawl their eyes out when their dog got adopted and left. We used to have a service dog program, which was really great, but we had to let that go for lack of staffing to support it. We offer medical services, and that's contracted through a company called Horizons. Are you familiar, Beth? Okay. So we provide basic medical care. And inmates get annual physical, an annual dental checkup, an annual eye exam. They are required to pay $2 a visit for anything beyond that, unless it gets into a continuous care for the same issue, and then we don't charge them each time. But at least for that first visit, we charge them $2 because people being human, you can live without something for a long time and not think much of it, but the minute you know it's available to you, you want it all the time. So we have to charge that $2 just to put a little bit of a barrier there so that we don't have inmates running out to the clinic every time they get a hangnail. We provide some limited hospice care. Death in prison is a thing. We talked about the group of inmates 65 years of age and older. So we do, and then this is a group of a group of people who don't generally engage in good, healthy practices, so there are certain diseases represented. And so we do have a limited hospice program. And then we're just in contract with several area hospitals to provide advanced services that we can't. Mental health services, again, provided by the same contract provider. Boy, mental health is a huge, huge deal. KDOC is the state's largest mental health provider. We house the largest population of Kansans who are lagging in reading ability and who grew up in an environment surrounded by poverty, abuse, and addiction. When Greta and when they were giving the trauma care talk, that just resonated with me. I thought, they're dealing with children. I'm dealing with the exact same issues in adult men. So a lot of what they were talking about really hit home for me. 39% of incarcerated inmates are affected by mental health in one degree or another. 22% are SMI, meaning serious impairment of functioning, interfering with ability to meet ordinary demands of living and require an individual treatment plan. 11% are SPMI. That's an extreme and lasting impairment in functioning. And 6% just have short-term mental health issues, a diagnosis that interferes with functioning in social, occupational, or other important activities, but generally resolved within 6 months or less. We are in close communication with our mental health staff all the time. There is abuse of that, in that when an inmate is mad at us for one reason or another, he demands to see mental health right there and then. I don't know if he thinks that those people are going to help him get what he wants or stop whatever's about to happen, but that they try to use it as a crutch sometimes. But there's no doubt that we're dealing with some very serious mental health issues. We provide religious practice opportunities. We are federally mandated to allow, oh my golly, I don't even know how many different religions to practice if the proper conditions are met. First of all, there has to be 2 or more inmates who want to engage in that religion, so we can't have just one guy having his own religious call-out. But we provide an opportunity for worship and an opportunity for study for every religion that is allowed to practice. Most of the worship and study is led by a community liaison to that religion, because we don't have anybody on staff that I know of who is a practicing Jew. But if we have 2 or more inmates who are and want to practice that, we need to call someone in from the community who can lead that. Sometimes that's kind of hard because there's a lot of religions that are allowed to practice that I'm not familiar with, and I don't know that we have anyone in the immediate community who practices that. Volunteers. We cannot do an awful lot of what happens there without the volunteers. And Mennonites are the largest group of volunteers represented by a mile. We had a former deputy warden. She and I were not kindred spirits. We didn't see eye to eye on much of anything. And I recall her saying in a meeting one day, she was expressing her severe frustration in that all these darn volunteers are Mennonite. I think what she was trying to say is she would like to see some volunteering from the communities that the offenders come from. If an offender is a biker sort of person, then let's find a Christian biker who can come in and be a volunteer and mentor to this, somebody that there's a commonality. But she didn't express it that way, and the way it came out was very offensive to me and everyone sitting around me who know that I'm Mennonite. And I took that opportunity to express to her that if the Mennonites quit coming, she'd have an extremely small volunteer base. And then as those of you who raised your hands, we do have some volunteers in our own congregation. Bruce and Bob volunteer through our Match 2 program, meaning that once a month they go to the facility. They have been matched with an offender, and it's just a visitation. It's not counseling. It's not fixing their problems. It's just giving that offender someone to talk to, because it's usually an offender who doesn't get visitors otherwise. Daryl volunteers through a different program that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. Kind of at the tail end of all of our programming and services that we provide is our reentry program. So we, as staff and as volunteers, we spend a lot of time working with offenders on reentry. What can we do, in addition to all of the programming, to get them basic skills? What can we do to help them be more successful when they are released? So we have a lot of we kind of call them mini classes. So we help out with money management, parenting, housing responsibilities, job readiness. We have a lot of cognitive programs, kind of adopting Mahatma Gandhi's, one of his thoughts. Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions. We have to change the thought process if we hope to change the behavior. So we have a lot of cognitive programs. And statistics will support that if an inmate, or if anybody will engage in cognitive-based programming, we can reduce recidivism for 10 to 30%. And when you figure we're housing inmates at $67 a day, 30% of them don't come back, that's a huge number that taxpayers should be interested in. So release planning, that's kind of where the counseling staff comes in. We're working with the inmate, not only in getting him into appropriate classes and programs, but we're also talking to him about when you get out, where are you going, who are you going to be with, and what will you be doing? We don't just send them out across the tracks and say, see you in 5 days when you violate and come back, because we've sent you out here with no resources and no changes in anything. As staff, one of our little colloquialisms, I did not say that right. We tell inmates, change your playmates, change your playground. But that's not always possible. You were talking about a group that right off the bat doesn't have a lot of resources. So if they've got any family that's willing to take them back, that's where they're going, because they got nowhere else to go, which puts them right back with the same playmates and in the same playground. So we have to work with them to figure out how to be successful within that environment that hasn't changed. We need to get them to change. The program that Daryl is involved in is called Mentoring for Success. The Secretary of Corrections loves this program. He regards this as a key component to addressing recidivism. The KDOC trains and matches community volunteers with offenders beginning 6 months prior to release and continuing for 6 to 12 months after release. The mentor walks with the offender through this process. I don't think in terms of offender releasing how many times he's done it. It's scary every time, because prison for some of these guys is comfortable. They know it. It's their structure. They're told what to do, when to do, how to do it. It's when they go out and they're responsible for themselves and they have to make decisions on their own and be responsible for that. And that's scary. And so our volunteers, our mentors, walk with them and help with the decision making, not making decisions for them. But when the offender says, yeah, I think I'm going to earn my money after I'm released by breeding reptiles, that's where Daryl says, can we come up with a plan B? to just quickly speak to some of the problems that as staff we deal with this population. We do deal with gang issues. We have gangs that are specific to the prison setting, and then we have gang issues that follow them from the community. We all see what's happening in Wichita right now. They've had more homicides this year than in several years past, and we still got several months to go. Almost all of them are gang related. As staff in a correctional facility, we're paying attention to that because we are expecting that those issues are going to follow into the facility, that there's going to be retribution and retaliation inside our walls for what happened out on the street. Inmates extort one another for a lot of different reasons, and payment is rendered in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's simply about control. When an inmate has so little control over his environment and what happens within his day, if all he can do is control this little square of tile and say, that's mine and you don't get to stand on it unless you pay me, then that's what they do. Human beings in generally take advantage of those who are weaker, and that's simply amplified within the prison setting. And then inmates will, we have to deal with sexual violation and predatory behaviors within the facility, and protect inmates from other inmates. I'm gonna run out of time. So to speak to the overarching title of the summer series of Know Yourself, Know Your Neighbor, Know God. Who is my neighbor? The parable of the Good Samaritan, kind of talks to who is our neighbor. And this is something I kind of struggle with in my work, is I'm dealing with these people who are difficult to work with. And to do that with compassion, sometimes it's difficult for us. And as we sit here in this room, do we consider the offenders who are currently incarcerated our neighbor? I can tell you when they're released, they're coming to our communities. So if you don't consider them your neighbor right now, they quite literally and physically can be your neighbor tomorrow when they're released and they move into the house next door to you, and their children are going to school with your children or your grandchildren. And we bear that in mind as we do our work. We treat humanely. We really approach our work as this person is going to be released from prison, and we might see him in the grocery store. And do we want him to remember us as someone that he hated? And am I in danger now because I was so horrible to him? Or is he going to want to come up to me and say, Ms. Kroeker, I remember those things you did for me. I appreciate it, and I'm really doing good. And they want to tell you how they're doing good. Don't get that a lot, that interaction, but it does the heart good when you get that. Of the 32 years that I've worked at the facility, I think I'm the only Mennonite there. So of course, they all think I'm Amish. But I am thoroughly convicted that God protects me there. He pushes me, he pulls me, he blankets me with his protection and with his guidance. I don't know how anybody can work there. They do. There's people who work there without that conviction. And I don't know how they do it. Excuse me. Questions?
Misty, do you have any thoughts on or observations about the family relationships that inmates have and how it affects your work and how it affects the inmates?
We tell inmates that Those family relationships are very important. You know, and we're not telling them something new. The families sometimes can be their problem. And it's very hard to tell somebody, you need to get away from your family. They're not helping you. And when resources are so limited when they release in terms of where to go, there are a number of halfway houses, but generally inmates don't like to conform to the rules of those places. They go home, there's not so many rules, which is part of the problem. Also, we deal with the families a great deal, and it's ramping up in a negative way. If I have an interaction with an inmate and he's not happy, he goes out, he leaves my office, he gets on the phone, he calls his family. Within 5 minutes, they're calling me, chewing my backside hard because I didn't treat their person right, because I didn't do what he wanted me to do. So they are advocating, which, you know, everybody needs someone to advocate for them, but everybody stay in your lane. And so I will tell them, you know, I am working with your loved one. I can't work with his entire family also. So I will work with him, and he can tell you what he wants to tell you, but you need to trust that we are doing our job and working with him in a proper manner. But sometimes the families can be difficult for us.
You mentioned that Topeka was the only place for women.
Yes.
Was there not a place up in Beloit at one time?
That was a juvenile it was a juvenile facility for girls.
Okay.
That was not, it's totally separate from the Kansas Department of Corrections.
Is there a need for more of that for the women?
If the numbers keep growing, yes. But the state of Kansas does not have the money to build a new facility. And quite honestly, we're having difficulty staffing the facilities we have. Right now, Hutchinson is 50 officers short. And all the facilities are facing that problem. So we have, as a department, we have to get creative on how we deal with the growing number of those who have been convicted of crimes. And the department's done a lot of things that, as a long-term employee, don't feel real good to me, but no one asked me my opinion. So, you know, we do what we can do, but for my staff, they're a very hard-working group of people. You know, offenders will tell you we're not doing anything for them. The families will say we're not doing anything for them. But I cannot tell you how hard my staff works with these offenders to get them into programming, and then just the personal interactions. You know, they bring these inmates into their office and they check them on their inappropriate behaviors. They check them on their inappropriate thinking. They talk to them about how else could you have handled this situation. They're personally engaged. And so there has to be more and more of that because we're not building anything new and creating new ways to house people.
Is the one at Lansing going to get rebuilt?
It is currently a portion of the Lansing facility. Lansing was the first facility, the oldest, and I shouldn't say they haven't taken care of it as well, but those limestone buildings have to be taken care of or they crumble. And they are having to shut down one of their older sections and build a new replacement for it because it's just so structurally unsound. And it's being built to modern day practices, so it will require fewer staff to run it, which we have to do if we can't hire enough staff.
Yeah, our granddaughter works out there, and
In my cell house.
pardon?
In my cell house.
Oh, okay. Anyway, she was talking a little bit, and I didn't follow exactly what she was talking about, but solitary confinement, you might go into that just a little bit. And she was also talking about inmates' most important thing to them is having a reflective device that they can shove out their cell block so that they can communicate with other prisoners.
So our restrictive housing unit is our segregation unit. I have stats in there I was going to talk about, but that's boring. Department-wide, our number of inmates housed in segregation has declined, but Hutchinson's numbers have risen sharply, and that is strictly because we have moved inmates between facilities to maximize bed space. And the way that that got done was to bring a bunch of restrictive housing inmates from El Dorado to Hutchinson. When an inmate is in restrictive housing, he is in that cell for 23 hours a day, and mental health issues become a much greater issue under those conditions. As staff, we work really, really hard to get them out of that situation as fast as we can. Deal with whatever the issue was that placed them in there and get them out. Because it's not healthy, it's not cost efficient, but we do have some offenders whose behavior is so outlandish, so dangerous, that we have no other option but to keep them in there. But when you are in a cell with 3 stone walls and a fairly solid metal door, you don't have interaction with other people very much. And so the whole mirror thing, they're not supposed to have one in restrictive housing, but if they do, yeah, they're just looking for anything because they're so confined.
Misty, I know what my impetus was to enter the career of nursing. What presented to you to make you pursue this career?
I was 20 years old, straight out of JUCO, and needed a job. I hired on in a clerical position. My dad was thrilled. It was civil service. You got to commit hara-kiri to lose that job. But after having been there, I had phenomenal mentors. I was allowed to be a part of things I had no business being a part of, but it allowed me to learn. And then I got a little too big for my britches and decided, as a secretary, I can do what those counselors do, and I can do it better. I don't know that I do it better, but but that's how that happened.
Wow, thank you. I think maybe our next series is everyone come in and talk about their jobs. How about that, huh? Wow, thank you. Let's give her a hand of thanks. Very informative and also last minute, very excellently done. Next week we're getting into our prison section of our discussion. Next week we're going to have Gary Flory, former director of Kansas Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, come talk about the school, what is called in some sectors the school to prison pipeline. So it'll be interesting too.
And his wife works for us.
And that's right, she's a librarian.
Librarian,
yes. So come next week for the last of this whole series. Let's come back for worship at 10:30.